Good evening, world. Welcome to the Joko conversation for this evening.
And good evening.
I'm Youssef, member of the Joko Collective. Youssef Doucet, a poet, professor of composition and literature, creative writing, a scholar of cultural studies with emphasis on that intersection of Africana studies and media studies. And I'm joined by my partner and comrade, Tasha.
Greetings, everyone. And yes, this is Tasha. Um, Glad to feel everybody's energies, all 22 of our beloved participants. And that is a good thing. And so we always start in acknowledging our own ancestors, our personal ancestors, the folks whose struggles and visions and individual efforts bring us to the point where we are in our walk and in our lives, finding ourselves blessed to understand something about this world and to feel ourselves with some clarity on the side of promoting that which is good, that which is just, that which is reciprocal, that which is accurate, that which is right, life giving. So we give that
That
acknowledgement. We acknowledge our collective ancestors, ancestors of the collective African family who have pushed forward um, for this world, for this just world, for a um, world free of oppression and predation in this era of oppression and predation. And so we give that acknowledgement and recognition as well. We um, always extend our acknowledgement and, um, in summary, to all that, um, acknowledgement of the ancestors of the First Nations of this land, of this Turtle Island, and in this area called the Los Angeles Basin of the Tongva people, at whose hospitality we do this work, and at the hospitality of whose ancestors we do this work for the liberation of all oppressed peoples. So may it go well. May we say some things that are um, appropriate and inspiring, and you know move that move that needle another degree toward victory for the
yes,
cause. And there we are.
indeed. So our subject for the night, right? We're really continuing the discussion on this attempt to roll back the 20th century, or at least those progressive and revolutionary aspects of the 20th century, the 19th century, even as we find ourselves a quarter of the way through this 21st century. And when we think about, we're talking about a rollback, and this was explicitly voiced by, one of the conservative or reactionary intellectuals, if that isn't an oxymoron.
Oxymoron.
The that the effort was, the goal was to, or is to, roll back the 20th century. That was the language used. I believe it was a Heritage Foundation early member or founder, and um, forgive me for not having that name on my uh, tongue. I didn't
Hmm.
know that I would reference it so early, but at any rate, uh,
Hmm.
look at, this effort in Arizona to revive a 19th century anti-abortion law.
Mhm.
The current felon president himself, talking about invoking
Absurd.
a 1798 law.
Mhm.
There, how much more
Mhm. Mhm.
straightforward, right, is the attempt to actually, take us back beyond the 20th century, which itself was only progressive insofar
Yeah.
as it has been progressive or was progressive, because of the fight back, right? The struggle of working peoples, colonized peoples, marginalized groups of folks. At all the various areas that are under attack. Um,
Mm.
the rights of immigrants,
Mhm.
women,
Mhm.
those who
Mhm.
are differently abled in all
Mhm.
the various ways,
Mhm.
various racialized groups, and a resurgent, or at least no longer embarrassed, suddenly mainstreamed, militant white nationalism, quite often in this country, Christian nationalist, which most Christians who aren't actually Christian nationalists, um, at least the professionals, that is, the pastors and the theologians, etc., have already identified as a type of heresy, right? And
Mm.
actually, sort of it really is anti-Christian, um,
Mhm. Mhm.
as the understanding of what it means to be on a Christian mission has evolved, and that too is sort of a part of the rollback of the 20th century
Mhm.
because of the direction of mainline, and not just Christianity, right? Many of the mainline um, religions across the board, the so-called world religions,
Right.
the, so
In
yeah,
that hierarchy, in that
in
imagined
that
hierarchy,
higher,
it's only
exactly,
the Judeo-Christian and yeah, every now
that
and then they'll give a
higher,
nod to the Buddhists
and the Vedic system, right?
in the Vedic system, but Ifa is
Religions
absolutely a world religion. Mhm.
with scriptures, as if these other non-Eurasian traditions also don't have scriptures, many of which were burnt upon discovery.
Mm.
So
Mm.
anyway, but that isn't our specific discussion, though. I think it's part of the discussion we promised with our title, right? As we wanting to look at this pushback against modernity, against the developments of political modernity in particular, and the notion of rights. And because it is, that's the language that people are using. Um, our rights, folks' rights, coming under attack, whether or not people have certain rights, coming under attack. And even in the language that we're hearing some in the United States, the language of democracy, right? The threat to democracy is certainly tied up with notions of
Mhm.
who has the right to do what. What
Mhm.
again are our rights
Mhm.
in a democratic society? So,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, so this idea, right? This idea of rights, and um, you suggested that we have this kind of conversation, and other as we can continue looking at this rollback attempt, um, where we could zero in on some of these areas, and thought it'd be helpful to start with this question of rights, right? And so if I can ask you, um, what Well, I want to. Well, I guess I could say inspired, but what moved you to start with that discussion?
Um, well, um, I don't know that I was specifically, moved to start with rights, but it is actually a great place to start because it describes the expectation of all peoples, really globally. Is there a place where there's not a discussion on one level or another of the increasing these human rights, or as
Mhm.
you'll talk more about tonight, the concept of the rights of man and from whence it emerges and whatnot. So I mean, in a think a very real sense, it is axiomatic to anything to so much, yeah, to anything else we'll discuss if we want to talk about the um uh proliferation of knowledge and education that emerges from a discussion of the rights of the citizen, the rights of, right, these civil kinds of rights. um if we want to talk about um the the problem for the white supremacist establishment of these colored folks that have been moved about in the colonies and create these kinds of polities and are pushing against the margins in these nations. And it's been through the vehicle and the discussion of rights of man, human rights, these various kinds of rights. So all of that is to say, I think it's a good axiomatic place to start. When we talk about these kind of what we specifically mean about what's being pushed back against. And as you and I'll throw in as you kind of prepare to hold forth on it. Um, Something that has caught my attention and caught my eye is the role of deism and the role of an expanding elevation of rationality, and that undergirds this thinking, that undergirds the Enlightenment thinking um, the logics of rights, of the rights of man, right, and all these other kinds of rights, and how consistent that logic is, in the various arguments for rights, that for citizen rights and citizen kind of participation that rolls down to our present day discussion of rights. So that being said, please talk to us about
Well,
the importance
well,
of this.
actually, I had another question for you just based on what you were saying, but I'll hold off on that. Um, I mean, it's not, it's certainly an idea that the idea of a right, right? So, that someone or someone's right to something certainly predates the modern era, right? And modern political ideas of rights. So it seems as much as anything, what's meant by a right, or in that post Enlightenment, or as it develops in the Enlightenment, it is as much about expanding that, and
Mhm.
mentioned before this notion of expanding the franchise. Um, so there's that, right? But I always, I think it's an important point, and I always look at origins of words, right, and what they're related to, and that the word right, right, the English word right, in all of its various meanings, um, is related to the words for rule. and Reign and Reich and all of those, and including
Mm.
its Latin versions, right? And all of the various Latin derived languages has that same Indo-European what is it, reconstructed root, um, ret or something to that effect, right? Again, related to the root word for rule, ruler, regal, etc. Right? Um, and meaning straight, right? Having that meaning of straight as as in straightforward or physically, straight. That applied metaphorically, the idea of moral, right? Moral, upright, upright, right? So, but this notion of a rule, right? What is the rule
Mm.
here? Um, and how does that, what is that right, and how do those rights extend? I mean, what is the meaning of a right in the Athenian democracy, right? It certainly isn't. It's for a particular few, right? Men of property, citizens of property. The Not even all the free citizens, but particular citizens who have certain rights. Um, Likewise under the Roman Republic, those who are inside, right, inside the political world, and as opposed to those on the absolute outside, those who have no rights, right? Slaves have no rights. Certain women have no rights. A patrician woman has certain rights. That is to say, I guess, certain rules laid out
Right.
to follow the particular path. Um, the right of the monarch of
Mm.
life or death, right? Or the right of the paterfamilias, of the right to hold the family's life in his hands, or to enact judgment, right? To be able to enact judgment on his own, and who can testify and who can't. So all of these sorts of rules, right? And um, that are laid out. And I think this is the major thing in the English speaking world, and perhaps the modern West, but certainly in the English speaking world, right? That makes the Magna Carta such a big thing, but such a big deal in English common law. Um, right? Certain rights of the king extended to the barons, or at least the barons being well, the Great Charter, right? Putting it in writing that the barons have these certain rights. And all that to say that the idea, right? This idea of the rules of the society, right? The rules, the sort of all the meanings of right? But the
Mhm.
rules, the straight
Mhm.
path, the
Mhm.
moral upright position. I mean,
Mhm.
all of these sorts of things that then get
As well as
stretched in this
dominion.
idea
Mhm.
of what one can, or at least, well, 'cause I'm trying not to use the word to define the word,
Mhm.
but the
Mhm.
things that become accessible or that one is entitled to, and even that
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
phrasing, entitled, right,
Mhm.
and
Right.
implies some kind of institutional sort,
Right. Right.
blessing on it or approval.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but I so so what makes the modern idea, or how does it begin to expand? And I think you were getting at that, right, with the this is part of the intervention of the Enlightenment thinkers, um, and the move toward the rational, uh, challenging whether merit is merely a question
Mhm.
of blood, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
The aristocracy, right? The rule of the
Mhm.
best. What makes the best, right? Is it
Mhm. Mhm.
traditionally it's
Mhm.
blood, right? That special blood descended from a god or something like that, or whatever the case,
Mhm.
the so-called nobility.
Divine right, right?
Divine right,
Mhm,
exactly. Divine right.
mhm.
Um, and so, what's rational about that, right? And even that is, does that even allow the best in a society to rise to leadership? And often can mean, rule of the worst, right? Because it's just if it's just based on blood, and the temperament of a monarch, of a local
Right.
aristocrat,
Mhm,
and whether or not
mhm,
they are good persons or not. So that kind of irrationality, an attempt to rationalize leadership, even, right? And
uh-huh,
um, and make an argument, make a case for um, the rational character of the human being, particularly, well, particularly for these writers, of men, right? The rational character of men, and that being um, in its own way democratized, or kind of democratized, right? It's a feature of being human, or being a man anyway.
mhm,
um, and and particularly if these men have demonstrated their ability through the acquisition of wealth,
mhm,
property.
mhm,
Why should they not also have the ability to rule, right?
mhm.
Um, and it's not unrelated to. I mean, so why have these same Enlightenment thinkers really called the Renaissance? Their notion of the rebirth of classical education, and approach to reason. This a particular kind of idealization of the Greco-Roman world, right? The classical world, but one in which, I mean, this is also supposed to be an aspect of the Greek miracle, right? The ancient Greek miracle is the move toward objectivity and rationality, at least as in the Western imagination of its intellectual history, right? The So that's also informing, as by the time we get to the Enlightenment, um, this that's preceded by the age of reason, right? And the Enlightenment is preceded by the age of reason, and this notion of the elevation of the rational, the reasonable, the logical, as a organizing principle of society, and the production of knowledge. You're about to ask something.
Um, yeah, I think I have, when you I was something I was anticipating, and I'll wait for that question when you kinda get to it in your discussion, which I presume you will, kind of get to. If not, I'll raise it. But I did want to kind of hop back to summarize your points about the all the conceptualizations that are inherent in the term rule, right? And the way we see that meet out with, like, well, certainly regulation, institutionalization,
Mm-hmm.
uprightness, uh, moral, speaking of
Right.
a moral uprightness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Straight
also
straightforwardness, the straight path, all these notions.
as in, right, referring, yeah, right, back to that moral
Mm-hmm.
uprightness.
Even that synonym, correct, right? The rect
Mhm.
part is the same
Is the
root,
same
right?
word. Yeah.
Rick and wrecked, right?
It's
Because
all of these ways that it talks about rulership, and
mm-hmm.
uh, uh, the ways in which inviolable or un power can be expressed, not checked by another. in the society, right?
Yeah.
Because of the institution of it, right? So the the institutionalization of it, the maybe even the naturalization of it, yeah, in that it becomes
That
um
language is even used, right? It begins to be used. Natural rights.
right, right, natural rights and right is this discussion, the relationship with um the natural world and natural orders and all of these kinds of things in that beginning of grappling with reimagining the connection to the natural world outside of the excuse me outside of the uh, specific mythologies of the church and grappling with the those particular mythologies and notions and those things have been set forth there. So again, I know you'll get to it. The deism, yes, an elevated intelligence kind of thing happening, but not what you all are talking about. Something that is in concert with observations and rational observations. I imagine a great era of um, great era of argument and rebuttals and argument and counter argument, and this time where these arguments are very important and very very what and when I say important, I mean taken very seriously. The this is an argument has been made. And so I'll end by saying um it's also very interesting to me that um this kind of hyper fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism, and here this Christian fundamentalism um has been able to hold such sway, right, in this uh and in the name of the founding fathers so often, and in the name of Americanism so often, with in a country where the Constitution was conceived by people who were moving toward a rationality. So anyway, please continue.
Well, the interesting, I mean, I don't know how important deism is. I mean, it
Okay.
certainly is, it was an important idea for that group of intellectuals.
Okay.
But I don't know, that just that, right? Just for that group of intellectuals. I mean,
Mm,
I think, over time, as the church and the various churches, have became less central in society, as central, even sort of governing institutions. The popular, the centrality of religion has certainly fallen. It continues to decline in what we think of, or what is often called the West, right, or Western societies. But it certainly didn't disappear, and I think it's
mm,
important always to remember at the same time, or maybe I should say concurrent with the age of reason and leading into the era of the Enlightenment, so called,
mm,
are the Salem witch trials, right? And
mhm,
etc. Right, and even the burning times, right, and the witch hunts and the Spanish Inquisition and the Portuguese Inquisition and the and they, none of them got clean hands, right? Right. So the 30 Years War, um,
mm.
the wars between the Catholics and the Protestants, and a lot of the deism is really a reaction and a response to that, right? As
Okay.
and indeed, the instituting of freedom, or well, what's called freedom of religion, or the right to one's own religion, or the right from freedom to and freedom from religion, rooted in that history. But we yeah, that fundamentalism that is seems to be so prominent and still represents like a minority among the world's Christians and the world's Muslims and all these other traditions. But they have been the most vocal,
Mm.
um, and they've been aided and abetted though by money, right? Because one thing that many of the fundamentalist practitioners across faith traditions, one thing that they have been, in terms of kind of an anti-modernist, anti-modernity turn, is anti-communist, anti-socialist. Um, and so been useful, right, to the capitalists and the billionaires who likely, aren't as faithful and not, don't, um,
Mhm.
not to suggest that there may be some, sincerely devout capitalists.
Mhm.
So much of the ideology of capitalism, and it's wrapped up in that whole Protestant work ethic, and the Protestant ideology, in the ideology that material blessings in this world, however achieved, are a sign of God's favor, right?
Favor. Mhm.
So that's been quite useful, uh, fundamentalist or not, right? But um, fundamentalisms have been encouraged and well funded by imperialist capitalist, um, to push back the secularism
Mhm.
of the socialist,
Mhm.
uh, world, the communist
Mhm.
efforts, even though any number of socialists, whatever their range, communist, democratic, socialist, whatever, any number of them are believers, right? Any number of the millions of communists killed in Indonesia,
Mhm.
you know, were believers.
Mhm.
Maybe not. Others certainly. This is going to still be true. I think, and I mean, whatever the stories are about repression of the Russian Orthodox Church, it didn't disappear in the Soviet Union, and actually was poised to make the kind of comeback. But again, so again, all that to say, for all of the supposed and maybe even expected atheism of communist and socialist, that isn't always the case. That people give up their belief system, and in fact, for many, and of course, I'm
Right. Mhm.
very interested in specifically in liberation theology coming out of the Catholic Church in the '60s and '70s. Um, finds itself quite compatible with socialism, Marxism, even, if many of the liberation theologists themselves would not identify as Marxist, they see themselves in community and solidarity with the Marxists who are trying to create a more
Mhm.
equitable world, right?
Mhm.
And empower
Mhm.
the poor. And this
Mhm.
idea of this liberation theology idea of the
Mhm.
preference for the poor, right? And God's preference for the poor,
Mhm.
etc.
Mhm.
So, so that's why I say the deism is important, and certainly was important intellectually, and in the forming of these modern republics, insofar
Mhm.
as they are republics and secular,
Mhm.
right? Secular,
Mhm.
either deciding to tax churches, or not tax churches, but not allow churches to be the organizing principle of the society, etc. And yeah, a lot of the right wing pushback has utilized, right, some of the in many ways some of the most backwards aspects of the religious life of people, um, including the various kind of the indigenous traditions around the world. Um, that thing that Frantz Fanon talks about, and the way empire will use the native culture, right? But a version of the native culture that traps it in a moment of history that that reinforces the imperial ideology of we are the moderns bringing
Right.
these benighted people into
Uh-huh.
civilization. At the
Uh-huh.
same time, we'll preserve this these sort of
Right.
quaint structures
Yeah.
um, as a way of sort of aggrandizing, the modernity of the West, right, and stultifying, right, the culture, or refusing to recognize the dynamism
Mm-hmm.
in the native culture, which is also
Mm-hmm.
always changing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I feel like we've gotten a little bit away from the
The
discussion of
topic.
rights, but that's
Yeah.
okay because it is all related.
Mm-hmm.
Because so what does emerge, right? You mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
right, the rights of man, and and to that has to be added, right, the Declaration of Independence, right? These political ideas um, that emerge in the late 18th century, right, through these discussions among these intellectuals, right? The importance of John Locke, what's his name, the French guy, Rousseau, right? Is it Jean-Jacques Rousseau? All the these Enlightenment thinkers.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm leaving some Germans out, but you get that
Mm-hmm.
group of folks in the
Mm-hmm.
18th century, from which emerges these important modern political documents, the Declaration of Independence, which is filled with ironies. As one reads the whole petition, right, and to the king, and the rights of man, right, coming out of what then becomes the French Revolution, and then I
Mm-hmm.
would add to that the lesser known um, Mary Wollstonecraft, Mary W. Shelley's mother, um, in a response, or really in an intervention to the rights of man,
Mm-hmm.
a vindication of the rights of woman
Mm-hmm.
um, that she's writing.
Mm-hmm.
You already, talking about expanding this notion of the rights, and what is now not just the rights of the patricians, the rights
Mm-hmm.
of the aristocracy, the right of the monarch,
Mm-hmm.
the rights of citizens, right, and moving
Mm-hmm.
people from subjects to citizens, right, from
Mm-hmm.
subjects of
Yes.
a monarch to
Mm-hmm.
citizens of a
Citizens of a
republic.
nation.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Of a republic
yeah,
specific. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and specifically of a republic.
Mm-hmm. That is
And
democratic in one way or another.
one
Mm-hmm.
way or another.
Mm-hmm.
But which is also, as we know, not extending those rights, right, to
Mm-hmm. Right.
certainly
Mm-hmm.
enslaved people, um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, poor people,
Mm-hmm.
women,
Mm-hmm.
etc. Right,
Mm-hmm.
in all of these places, and then again, that's been described as the history of the United States. I think it, more broadly can be described as the history of the modern republic, right? The effort to extend these political rights um, to everyone, right? To everyone,
Mm-hmm.
but then with that, extending these rights to everyone, even a discussion of everyone, right? Who is a citizen, who can be a citizen,
Mm-hmm.
what makes
Yes.
you eligible for these rights.
Yes.
So you think about what's his name, Judge, is it Judge Taney?
Right.
Um, a black man has no right
Rights.
or
Right.
rights that a white man need, observe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, same with women, right? A man had the right, the rule of thumb,
Absolutely.
right? And I
Yep.
don't know if the rule of thumb was pre-colonial only, or did it continue in, after the United States is established as a nation. But
Mm-hmm.
a husband's right to beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb.
Uh-huh.
Um, you know,
Right.
what's her right in
Yes.
that situation, etc. Right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
um,
Mhm.
that
Yes. Mhm.
eventually this idea of human rights, and we get to
Mhm.
this idea of universal human rights, right? By
Mhm.
certainly by the mid 20th century, but I think even earlier that that language. You were going to say something or ask something.
Um, but I don't know what it was. Go ahead.
Okay.
It's gone.
That's what I was trying to get to, actually. That the way
Mhm.
in which the notion of who has rights, um,
Yes. Mhm.
gets eventually, expanded to this idea of universal human rights, and
Mhm.
what makes you eligible for these rights? Being
Mhm.
born a human.
Right. So then we have to deal with we have to rebut the definition of human. Then you have to deal with what is it to be human? What is it to, you know, what is it to be qualified to participate as a citizen, right? Arguments against. And I think that actually was what I was saying. I'm anticipating you getting to and wanted you to address and look at some of the arguments that, I mean, with people of non European peoples, you have the flowering, the flourishing of scientific racism to explain our actual ineligibility for actual, civic participation on the grounds that we are not exactly human. We're approaching
Exactly.
humanity or we're a different sort of humanity as we're, linked to the um, you know, just the for instance those missing link theories that went with the um uh propaganda of the world fair and we found the missing link here and in these various places, right, in these various places, in these various uh place where folks are living these traditional lives. um and so there are, these arguments against uh, m- the qualifications, the qualifications for citizenship, and some of the arguments that were ventured to neutralize those qualifications or disprove, say, the worthiness of the female for participation, the worthiness in whatever you want to do with the worthiness of the African and the indigenous person for participation in citizenship. For all men, these rights, inalienable rights for all qualified
Mhm.
folks. Hmm.
Mm. I mean, I already mentioned, right? Even at the beginning of this discourse, Mary Wollstonecraft is already, making an argument to expand that to women, right? Um,
Hmm.
and But around the same time, Olaudah Equiano is already using the language of human rights in his the narrative of his life, um, as he describes, his capture and his sister's capture, in West Africa, probably in what's the area of Benin, I think. And he uses that language, right? In describing the enslavers, these abusers of human rights. And so and that language exactly, right? These abusers of human rights. So it's already language being used by an African in an abolitionist narrative, right? So at the very beginning, and I was thinking about it also in terms of of other than the West, right? What are notions of rights,
Yes. Hmm.
um, rules, uh,
Hmm.
what one has
Hmm.
access to, what
Hmm.
powers one has
Hmm.
access to, what that one can exercise, under whatever are the rules of a particular society, right? Um, you know, uh, uh, what does that look like in various African societies, ancient, medieval, modern? What does that look like in the
Right.
Americas, right? Various
Mhm.
kinds of rights of appeal, right? That
Mhm.
that ancient Kemetic story, the eloquent peasant, right? And the
Mhm.
peasant is asserting, his right, right, to
Mhm.
make his case before, before the pharaoh,
Magistrate,
uh,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So there's already a, outside, and what does it mean in within a caste system, in South Asia, in the in what's now
Right.
India,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
rights within a caste, right? Or are there rights between castes, etc.
Right.
What does that mean? What did it mean in medieval Europe? I mean, the part of the point of the Robin Hood story. Um, not those who did not have the right to hunt in the king's forest, um, but did have a right to the commons. And that's part of what happens with the emergence of the modern era, the shrinking of the commons. And now the commoners no longer have, the right to the resources of that land. They can no longer water their sheep there, right? Because now one person has
Mhm.
owns it. And so yeah, shouldn't leave that out because it's so important to the emergence of this modern political economy.
Mhm.
The role of property rights and why property
Precisely.
rights are so important, right? And so critical.
Precisely. Central in the dialogue of Western discourse of Western
Right.
rights in a
That's right.
way that it is not in discourses and this just the very superficial
Mm-hmm.
understandings that I have, where there is no, I mean, rights that are not based on a principle of ownership or wealth accumulation or property, but on my rights as a member of the community. And
Right.
one of
And
these is a right to those resources
the
by
right to
right.
the
The
resources.
the obligation for sharing, the obligation to share, the obligation to right to ration the what is collected, you know,
Mm-hmm.
as a to
Which begins to extend that discussion out to the rights of the other creatures with which we share the environment, right?
yes,
And and
yes.
so ends up becoming a discussion in the West, right? The
Mhm.
rights of
Mhm.
the fish and the
Mhm.
birds, etc. I mean, that animal
Mhm.
rights, right?
Mhm.
Eventually we get to that language, and even to the language
Mhm.
of children's rights, and um,
Right. Mhm. Right.
you know,
Yes.
the and this universal declaration, right? This the what the mid 20th century universal declaration of human rights, which is or does emerge out of that Western discourse of rights, right? And
Mhm.
the extension of the
Mhm.
franchise, the
Mhm.
extensions of the domain of rights, but it's still primarily in keeping with a central tenet of what has become a central tenet anyway of modern Western civilization and is there, nascent in ancient Western civilization, the rights of the individual, right, and
Yes.
privileging the rights of the individual.
Yes.
And so our friend and colleague, Kwame Shabazz, right, in a previous Joko conversation we were having about the rights,
Yeah.
and made the point of many folks in the global South
Mhm.
um, asserted, an addendum to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that's the rights of collectives, right? The rights of communities,
Mhm.
um, which is maybe
Mm.
most of the world still, right? The
Mhm.
rights of communities, um,
Mhm.
and and then these various social rights. So again, behind me, right? Those are what 1960s,
Yes.
1970s Cuban literacy brigades,
Yes.
because of the assertion of the right to an education,
Nation.
the right to literacy,
Yes.
And many of which, so these social rights
Yes.
to go along with the political rights that are
Yes.
also embedded, there are, I don't want to say embedded, are explicit, right, in the Universal Declaration, right, the right to an education, the
Mm-hmm.
right to, decent and dignified housing,
Yes.
the right to food, right,
Right.
adequate food, these social rights,
Right.
which are more communal in character, at least in terms of that, responsibility to each other, not just to myself as a free agent. Um,
Mm-hmm.
very much
Which
the
is, yeah.
Western political idea, right? The rights of
The mythical
man,
free agent.
the
Yeah.
mythical free agent, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Um, and of course, is very useful to capitalist ideology, right?
Yeah.
We're all in competition. Look out for yourself. Um,
Yeah.
and
And even to argue that rational self-interests leads to a social harmony,
right.
and what have eventually,
Eventually, right? Despite
eventually,
lived experience,
yeah,
it's somehow
yeah,
going to
that's
lead.
what will end up
Yeah.
eventually, right? And when it becomes an article of faith
Hmm.
that this
Hmm.
eventually will
Hmm.
um will come to pass, right? That this
Right.
eventually will come to pass.
Correct. Right. See, we can't get away from the word, right? And I've often thought about that, right? So this word, right, that means particular direction or handedness,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it means that in English and these
Mm-hmm.
other languages because
Mm-hmm.
most human beings are right-handedness, so it must be
Mm-hmm. Correct.
the straight way.
Must
Exactly.
be right in alignment and right.
Yes.
Be right. Yes.
And the other one is just in English, right? It's just what's left over. So this is the right one, and that's just what's left, right? So
Hmm.
the or even the Latin, right? The way rights become rights, and I can't remember it is droit in French,
Yeah.
derecho in Spanish. We know I can't
Yeah.
remember the exact Latin
Adjoa.
word,
Uh-huh.
but the idea
Right.
of the sinister, right? And
Right.
the
Right.
sinister, and sinister takes on that moral notion also,
Absolutely.
and not just handedness or
Absolutely.
direction, and
Yes.
then all those other things, meaning correct, moral,
Yes. Yes.
good,
Yes.
etc.
Which are connections that that don't leave, that remain, that are,
Hmm.
that remain in language usage, remain in the conceptualization. It's
Hmm.
always all of those meanings, probably, like, because the term sinister has lost its meaning in popular language. I mean, if you happen to know that sinister is a reference to the left hand, the left side of the body,
Hmm.
the leftiness of the
Hmm.
left, um what remains is this notion of uh unseemly,
Hmm.
um and all these kinds of things. But all of these other kinds of notions that are evoked by the term are still very much are still evoked, right?
Hmm.
Use the language, and it's such a long carryover, and it's kind of interesting, in a way that, for instance, my lovely mother, who's studying the um, symbolic language of Kemet, talked about the principle of Mott, right? The principle of Mott, as a unitary principle, right? So that it doesn't mean sequentially, taken from a Gardnerian dictionary, from a, what I'm saying, from a European logical kind of interpretation, cultural logics. It means simultaneously, um, that which is correct, that which is upright, that which is just, that which is reciprocal, that which is, it's not sequential. It's that in order for something to be one of the things, it is all of the things, at the same
Mhm.
time, and with that imagery, whether it's um well, most often the sickle, you know, and who wants to try to discuss the deep symbolism of that, but that becomes, I think, an important um kind of understanding to carry just about the power of language, because even however we conceive of language, and I think that we, as speakers of Western, or as of Western languages, and you know participants moreover in Western thought patterns and European thought patterns and all of that, um the relevance of that kind of symbolic, you know um realm is, maybe tends to be um less in the forefront, right? Kind of less in the forefront, but actually still an active reality, so that when we use a term, actually all of these different things do come to mind in the moment, and to meaning in the moment of the use of the term. Though, we may be thinking we're using it and applying it in its one area, there's still, actually all these other areas and considerations, and it also kind of takes me, unrelated to all of that kind of talk, um, the necessity of the ruler to be of good moral character, the expectation. There's still this kind of, what I mean? There's still a kind of expectation, I think, still a kind of, oh, kind of, don't know that there is a total loss of expectation that the one, folks in positions of social power, um, of rulership, uh, the ultimate rights, will also be upright in character. Um, Not the question of whether it happens, but do we still have? And I wonder what you think about that. If you if you think folks still have um, actually that expectation, that just a deep expectation that those in positions of governance um, ought be upright. And I think you've dipped away in your.
Well, I do have to dip away for a moment, but I will be right
Okay.
back and I'll respond.
Okay. All right. Marvelous, marvelous, marvelous. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, bantering while.
Okay, I'm
Oh, you're
back.
back.
So what
Okay.
I was gonna say is, actually, there was something else, and we were talking about, or rather, what am I trying to say? Um, the second half of the title for this particular program, this particular discussion. Why are they? Why are these rights under attack?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let me pick up there, right? And
Mm-hmm.
actually, well, I missed the last part of your question. Um, so I don't want you to try to repeat all that.
No. The last part of the question was just, do you think, and maybe you'll get back to this, maybe you won't. Do you think that there is still an underlying expectation
Oh
that
yeah,
the.
yeah, I do, and but people interpret that differently, right? What they might think an upright person is. I'm sure for some folks, despite his approval ratings not being great, think that the current president, the felon in chief, is a moral and upright man. They say so, right? And is doing the right thing. They think the moral thing doesn't matter, right? And of course, people are able to live with, where they call it, cognitive dissonance, um, or to believe that, and I've identified this person as a felon, and convicted, jury of his peers,
Yeah, but
according to the
that's
laws of the
explained
land.
away. It's actually something that's explained, right?
Well,
There's
this is what
explanation.
I'm about to say, right? That
Yeah,
they will rationalize it, right?
they
And,
can't endure that. It's all that's a hoax. That's a setup. That's a
so it's rationalized, right?
yeah.
Because they are convinced that he's a moral person. So yeah, there is an
Mhm,
expectation, whether the expectation or even delusion, and
mm,
whether or not it is actually the case. You know, I guess a more objective person has to say, because there are folks who also feel the same way about, several former presidents, all the former presidents in some cases, I'm absolutely confident that the case can be made that every United States president, has is or was a war criminal,
mm, mm,
certainly an abuser of human rights,
mhm,
a settler
mhm,
colonial, well, just a settler colonialist,
mhm.
each and every one of them, even the ones that we think the most highly of, if we think highly of any of them, generally have, at least neutral feelings about, say, Abraham Lincoln, um,
Mhm,
whatever, the political motivations for the
mhm,
Emancipation Proclamation, or the
mhm,
Civil War, and ending chattel slavery, at least, right? But at the same time that he, conducting a war that would end chattel slavery, he's also out west conducting a war of settler colonialism,
aggression, right. Mhm,
and maybe the best of them, what's his name? Franklin Roosevelt, right?
mhm.
Lays the groundwork for the New Deal,
Wow.
which was absolutely a positive and popular popular with the general population, etc. But still doing what he bragged about, as Secretary of the Navy, rewriting Haiti's constitution. Rewriting so he's the one who got rid of the Dessalines constitution. The
Mhm.
helped preside
Mhm.
over the looting of the
Right.
Haitian treasury, and then even as president, right? He's still, as good as the New Deal is, right? He's making, well, to get it through, right? He's making deals with Dixiecrats, to withhold some of those benefits to our people, and others, right? So ain't
Mhm,
none of them
mhm.
perfect, but
Yeah.
yeah, I still think that's an expectation, right?
Mhm.
Um, but the other part, right?
Whatever
Because
it
we're now
is.
over an
Yeah.
hour. The other part of, what we were going to talk about, why are these rights under attack? Because that's what's under attack, right? And
Mhm.
in that Orwellian sense of
Mhm.
using the language of freedom and
Crazy.
protecting. Well, I don't know that I hear them saying they're going to protect anyone's rights, though.
Mhm.
And maybe, and not paying, or not hearing everything. Maybe they've used the language of rights at some point. I can
Mhm.
imagine them using the language of rights around, their concern for, the right of,
Mhm.
girls and women not to play with boys,
Exactly.
right? They
Right,
might
right,
use it
right.
in that
Yeah.
way, right? But
Yeah.
there's no freedom, right? That it's really more often the language they're using, I think, in protecting Americans' freedom, through their various cuts of, and dismantling of the very agencies that protect
Mhm.
U.S. lives, right? The residents, rights to live healthy, to work for a living wage, to work in safe conditions. This is exactly what's being dismantled, right? The right to be healthy, the right to health care, which is, has the United States ever?
No
And actually, and thinking about that, I mean, there have been since the mid 20th century multiple uh,
attempts.
proposals and attempts, yeah,
Yeah.
to create some kind of national health care.
Right.
Truman floated
Right.
it,
Yeah.
right? And but it keeps being, it's voted down, and some folks are quite serious because of their racism. Again, they will punish themselves to make sure that people they don't think are deserving, which is typically those black people, those Indians on the reservations, those non-white immigrants,
Yeah.
those ambiguously white immigrants.
Yeah.
None of them, deserve this as far
Mhm.
as they're concerned, and therefore we should not have it. And that stuff is still haunting us. But no one challenges the right of rich people to make as much money as they can make.
Absolutely.
Indeed, I've heard, yeah, as a sports fan,
Absolutely.
people, sports fans argue that players
Mm.
shouldn't get paid as much as they get paid, that there should be a salary cap on teams so that, one team can't
Right.
pay all the best players. But
Right.
nobody says anything about whether
About
the owners have
owners,
the right to make as much money as they
yes,
want,
they do.
right?
Yeah, it's a pro boss
It's a pro
bias,
boss, a pro
pro
boss
boss,
bias.
anti-labor. Yeah.
And those are the rights under it. Everything right, that
Yeah. Yeah.
empowers, so because it comes down to power. So that's
Power.
that other meaning of right, right?
Yeah.
You have to have the right to do
Yes.
something is to have the power to do it. And
Yes.
they do not want to share power. They didn't mean for this democratic revolution to be genuinely democratic.
Mhm.
Again, so that effort to extend the franchise,
But
um,
it gets out of hand. Yeah.
and yeah, and to push that back, right?
Mhm.
This educated proletariat, these educated Negroes, these educated savages, period, right? They're getting
Right.
uppity and out of their place. So we got to push that back, and we need to re organize and re content education
Yeah,
so that
absolutely.
folks don't, learn to stay in their place,
Yes.
and all this, right? And this right.
Yes.
What do you mean? You think you have a right to protest, but we can make that illegal. So isn't that one of the latest things?
Yes.
Colleges will lose their funding if they allow
Right.
illegal protest, and who decides
Right.
if it's illegal or not, right?
Right.
And this. So anyway,
Illegal is what we say is illegal. What did he say? But when the governor from Maine said, "I'll see
mhm.
you in court," or what have you, you're not going to comply.
We're
Well, I'll
following the
comply.
law.
I'll
She said we're
comply with.
following the law, and he
Uh,
said
she said, "I'll comply with federal laws and whatnot," and then he said, "We are the law.
we are the law.
We are
Exactly.
the federal law."
So that takes you
Mhm.
right back to
Yeah,
monarchy, right?
absolutely.
This
Which
whole
is what
notion
we've
of
been
the
saying.
rule of law
Right.
versus the rule of man.
Right.
He has said the law is embodied in his man and the
Absolutely.
man. So um,
Yes. Yes.
it is that access to power, right? Now
Yeah.
wanting to share that power, wanting to limit the power of workers, wanting to limit the power of the people to protect the land, right? So all these environmental regulations are being pushed back again. The right for people to work under safe conditions, and so they dismantle OSHA.
Right. Absolutely.
Um, and why? Because they can't make enough money.
Yes.
What is this thing? This thing that Trump has given the Forest Service the right to just start cleaning up after the fires
Right.
because it isn't going fast enough.
Right.
Um, so a complete lack of regard for handling toxicity, right? That, how many toxic things burned in the fire. And this is why you take the time, to do it scientifically, right? With knowledge, with data,
Yeah.
carefully. But,
Yeah.
that's not fast enough. You can't make money fast enough that way, or
Fast enough cuts
it
into the
makes it
profit.
cost too much. And
Right. Cuts
uh,
into the profit.
and
Right.
we're not going
However,
to tax these billionaires as we
yeah.
should, and so it's got
Yeah.
to come out of your pocket
Yeah. Yeah. And
and your
the hint of accountability for the potential and the hint for accountability for the ruling classes, to accountability to the non-ruling classes, through if this rule of law is allowed to stand. And the right, I was looking as I was looking earlier in trying to prepare for the discussion, um, looking at the arguments of the opposition to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and whatnot. Nothing is different. Nothing has changed. Nothing is different. Spreading this power uh, increases the likelihood of subversion, insurrection. This subverts our power. No, and that's all there is to it. It's nothing
it disrupts
fancier
the
than that.
hierarchy. That's right.
It disrupts the high, and all there is to it, and all
Yeah.
this other,
It's the problem with the
blah
bourgeois
blah.
revolution, right? It just, particularly in the United States, right, or what becomes the United States, it's wasn't really revolutionary, right? It just replaced,
Yes,
one ruling group with another
yes,
ruling group, and not
yes,
really a revolution. And
yes.
interestingly, Dr. Oba Tashaka, listening to him, I think it was either this past weekend or the previous weekend, though I think it was this past weekend, and he makes the point that, what's called the American Revolution. He says also, what's called the Russian Revolution shouldn't be
Mm,
called revolutions. They were really coup
mhm,
d'états. That's
mm,
really what they were. Now,
mhm,
his reasoning for that, and he didn't go into great detail about it. And particularly
mhm,
with, we know that, there war was fought, right? Battles were fought,
mhm,
particularly in the
mhm,
United States.
mhm,
But it wasn't revolutionary. I mean,
mhm.
it didn't change the political system as such, right? It just, sort of the folks who were already in charge locally, just, sort of, got the franchise for themselves, right? And cut the royal partner
Mhm,
out. I mean, basically.
mhm. That's all.
Um,
It's all it's about.
and
Mhm,
that, I mean, ultimately, the United Kingdom, or Great Britain, probably, at the time, Great Britain was willing to give up, because they were much more focused on India. India was way more important to them, and
mm,
indeed the U.S. colonies were
mm,
kind of expensive, right, to maintain.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
so they were like, yeah, we can
mhm,
they didn't fight. They didn't fight real hard. Right? They didn't send their best, right? They didn't fight
mhm.
real hard. They didn't send their
Interesting.
absolute best, right? And because
Mhm.
India, well, what is India called? The crown
The
jewel, right?
jewel of
Or
right, the
jewel,
jewel of the
exactly,
crown. Yeah.
jewel of the crown. And that was not the North American colonies.
Mhm,
So, they were able to let them go, and the U.S. Remained a junior partner throughout the 19th century. Really, I mean,
mhm.
or by I guess by the turn of the 20th century, it's ready to emerge, but basically a junior power and backwater of Western
So I think
civilization.
that, yeah, it's a good kind of summarizing point, um, aligned with some of the things that we've been talking about, going back to say what is the pushback on rights? Where does that lead to? And if you ask Curtis Yarvin, if you ask Peter Thiel, if you ask the people who are making this power grab, those being kind of like maybe the rock stars of this
Yeah,
movement, which is of
yeah,
course much deeper, and broader and longer and whatnot. It's not this, surface piece. But yeah, the neo-feudalism. So to be quite specific, a pushback to what? feudal power relations,
Neo-feudalism, yeah.
monarchy, as he specifically
They said, yes,
articulates.
sort of corporate monarchs. Not,
Yes, this is
not
about
what they
a
call it, not an aristocracy of blood,
this is yeah,
but of money.
an aristocracy of, and all of the eugenic language and all of the, the new hierarchy of the most intelligent. It's not different, but that intelligence is to be demonstrated, or the proof of that is to be a member of this
Yeah,
techno
but
world, this
a
techno
techno world that is, or at least has practiced some, very deep racism, right?
yes.
Certainly willing to exploit whomever,
Yeah.
right?
Whoever.
But
It's
is
so
also
funny. Yeah.
very deliberately,
Yeah.
using, yeah, maybe an aristocracy of the most intelligent or whatever, but their expectation is the most intelligent are going to be Northern Europeans, and
Absolutely.
maybe East Asians, even though there
And
are a
East
number of
Asians.
South
Well,
Asians.
in fact, yeah, they're really willing to exploit uh that cultivated information class, that cultivated techno class, those
Hmm.
classes, and even give them honorary whiteness, and if not through an actual relationship, though I have no doubt that the fly on the wall will reveal to us that they're buttering up these South Asians who have always trying to figure out how they can capitalize on this uh, uh, Indo-European Aryan relationship. How can we be white with you? And I have no doubt, a whole lot of butter up, and the butter up of the welcoming the Asian into this hierarchy is above them in intelligence, and that's something that has been right part of this spiel, the new spiel, um, for decades, as it's been peeping out, as
Yeah,
it's been.
but and it's also, and very actively though, reproducing again these notions of the unintelligent race,
Absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
and creating reality to match that. So, how underreported it is again and again. The failure of journalism, but then journalism has been under serious attack because of its pathway. Information is a pathway to power for people.
Yep.
But the number of lawsuits against tech companies in Silicon Valley because of their racist hiring
Hmm.
practices, and
Hmm.
particularly not hiring Black people, not
Hmm.
hiring African descended
Hmm.
coders and engineers, etc.
Hmm.
Or when
Hmm.
folks do get hired,
Hmm.
being subject to hostile work environments.
Hmm.
Um, this repeating itself with women, regardless of ethnicity, right? So again, in this effort to or this dream of a neo feudalism, a neo tech feudalism, and all of the cultural practices and attitudes that go with again the reinstitution of these hierarchies, and them feeling themselves right now, white man back in charge, put you in your
Oh,
place,
yeah.
all y'all. I mean, again,
Yes.
I, they are living in an illusion. They just haven't, they haven't come up. Well, some of them have already come up against what they think, they can do now. And if the police weren't there to protect them, um, they would find out in a particular way.
Which
The
is always the case. Yeah. Right.
But so I
Yeah.
just don't want to leave that unsaid. That I believe those flies are on the wall, and in fact, I think there's already some various Asian folks in the industry are already talking about it, and even the whole notion of the what is it the H1B
Yes.
visas.
Yes.
they already know, to be able to exploit that labor when it comes over here. Already somebody tweeted out from one of these tech companies about the expectation of a 60-hour work week, or you ain't trying.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
Mm-hmm.
this complete
Right.
turn back
That's
of
exploitation.
all the gains, made.
Yes.
The hostility
Yes.
toward unions, the
Yes.
hostility, and so
Yes.
so a couple of things. It's certainly it's unsurprising that Elon Musk would be trying to cut all of these, federal agencies, right? That has long been a tenet of some of these, tech gurus of, the problem of government oversight, right? So just like other capitalists, like they don't like government oversight.
Right.
And then again, the racial
Oh,
hierarchies. It does matter, I think, that you've got um, a white South African, multiple white South Africans
absolutely.
who are
Yes.
quite happy under apartheid,
Yes.
as nostalgic for the apartheid era as many of these folks here of Donald Trump's age are nostalgic for the days
Yes.
of Jim Crow, and they
Yes.
are actively trying to take us back to those days, whatever they
Yes.
want to call it, whatever
Yeah.
sort of performance they do.
Yeah.
They this is they're trying to recreate that world,
Yep.
and they came to the really. I mean, I know people like to say the United States or South Africa is the most racist place, but they ain't paying attention to the United States. This
No.
the again the model for all the
All
others,
of it.
you know,
For
on how
all
to
of it.
segregate,
Makes
how
me feel
to
a little like,
how to
oh, well,
concentrate, you know.
oh, yeah.
So all of that,
You
right?
already know.
All
Hmm.
of that re-emerging pre-modern set of social relations, and again that kind of contradiction, right?
Yeah.
The hyper modern or the hyper modern tech world with the pre-modern social relations,
Yeah. And the
and
dark age vibe,
and the
the
dark
dark
age
age
vibe.
vibe.
um
The burning of the metaphorically and in some instances actually, but the burning of the libraries,
mhm.
um, the pushback on you actually shutting down research,
Yeah,
actually
exactly.
curtailing and attempting to defund um, academic pursuits to
Mhm.
only support the narrative that so you can reproduce and expand the narrative that supports this power structure,
Yeah.
your aggrandizement, and all these kinds of things. And that is literally, particularly with that anti-scientificism, so you're attempting to create a dark age for the masses, because you're not
So I think we should
just
pick it
like
up there.
vaccines. Yes.
I
It's
think we should pick it up there next
it's what
week. It's actually
823.
right before we
Yes.
came on. I was watching a science communicator talk specifically about that science under attack in this country, and as she said, science with a big S,
Yes.
in all of these various areas, science is under attack, and I think that that also that also allows us to talk about what was raised earlier, the emergence of these vigorous fundamentalisms, because they're absolutely connected to the anti-science, right? And
Yes.
again, this unholy alliance
Uh-huh.
between religious fundamentalists and really across various religious traditions, but specifically the Christian nationalist fundamentalism here in the United States, but not only the Christian nationalist fundamentalism, and the capitalist, who are also opposed to science when the science is
Yes.
protecting the environment, the people,
Yes.
slowing down their rapacity, right? And
Yes.
which is don't because how critical has scientific innovation been
Absolutely.
to capitalist expansion,
Yes.
or I should say capitalist exploitation,
Yes.
except when the science says no, you need to slow down before you go, digging here, before you go developing here. We need to run some tests.
Mm-hmm.
We need to check the soil
Mm-hmm.
from your previous years
Yeah.
of polluting,
Yeah.
etc. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's a great place for us
The
to pick up
next
the conversation.
element, right?
Yes,
The next
the
specific
anti-science
element
group. Yeah,
of,
which
yeah,
again, so
element of modernity.
a
This,
rejection of the Enlightenment, as you said,
uh-huh.
the cultivating of a new dark age,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the cultivating of a new dark age, plagues and all,
Plagues and all.
plagues and all, right? As the measles outbreak is now in 9 states.
No, it's not. It's a small thing. Those, they're quarantined. It's a few people. Don't worry, we're sending them extra supplies of cod liver oil,
Good.
um,
Vitamin A.
erythromycin, steroids, which,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't
Well,
need
I'm
to.
glad that it's a small thing because it was only in 2 states last week. So
Oh, good. It's good that it's a small thing,
yeah,
you know. So I wonder how many. Well, we'll see day by day. We
that
know
too.
we still have we have track of one child that's died. Let's
And
see.
it's so yeah, we that's a great place to pick it up because all of these various areas of scientific inquiry, scientific um, discovery,
Yeah.
and even the way in which that um, you know the the anti-science manifests in so many ways, both
In
on the
so many
right
ways.
and what
That's going to be rich.
people may think of as the left, or at least folks who consider themselves part of conscious communities
Hmm.
that are echoing
Absolutely.
and promoting, some of the same points of view as this anti-science right and this anti-medical science, anti-environmental science in
Hmm.
particular.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. So
Absolutely. And so there we are.
we
Yes.
are at
Ready to.
127. You want
Hmm.
to got some final thoughts before we go?
The only thought is, we're fighting it tooth and nail. We're resisting with everything we got, and the resistance is strong. And it gives one confidence. Not as not as easy as they would think, and it's going to get less and less easy,
Yeah.
less and less easy. So I think people will become
Excuse me.
more and more resistant and creative, clever, solve problem solving, right? Figuring out ways to keep clear, the rivers of information clear, the waters of information clear to find ourselves a cool, clean stream, um, and so yeah, it's on, and there's a whole millions of people who are willing, millions of people who are willing. Um, right on. That's it. That's all I got to say.
All right. So we will end it there. Folks, thanks for joining us. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe if you haven't already. Please like this video and please share it and tell your friends about it. We would like to be back on Sunday in conversation with our comrade and friend James, but we'll see if that happens or not. We will definitely be back next Thursday to pick up this discussion where we left off, and moving toward this rejection of science. Lived long enough to see people actually question whether the Earth is a
Earth,
sphere. I
right
never would have
on.
thought. So
Right on. So,
well, it's time to get off. We'll get back to it next week. Thanks,
yes.
people. If you're on Facebook, please do the same. Share this with folks. Like it. We really appreciate you. We really appreciate you, and you know, those of you who watch every week, you're in our hearts. Share with your folks. Tell them to get on in and also share as we're trying to spread the word.
And
And
join the
it's
conversation.
good.
That's always a
Yeah,
lot of fun when you join the
yeah.
conversation. It's great.
All right. Good night.